spark your interest. And then we're going to give you about 7 to 8 minutes to ask questions. Again, this is really just to spark your interest and make sure that you say, hey, I'm going to talk to that person later. I'm really interested in what they're doing. I want to know more. And we're going to keep us on time by using the infamous Rainbow Wheel of Death. Rainbow Wheel of Death. Rainbow Wheel of Death. That means the questions are over, we're moving on. That means the presentations are over, we're moving on. The Rainbow Wheel of Opportunity or Death. So I'm going to hand it over.
Can everybody hear me? Ruby, I'm holding this right. So I'm Sheryl, Grant. Nice to see you all. I feel like I know everybody. Nice to see your bodies and your faces. You're probably wondering at this point why some are presenting and some are not presenting. Have no fear, you will at some point, probably in January, definitely in March. What we did for this Sparking the Conversation session, we did not call them demos because that tends to make everybody's blood start to boil. So this is really about sparking the conversation. It's really continuing the kind of conversation that Sunny Lee from Mozilla and I had in the spring and summer. We reached out to all 30 grantee projects. We had fantastic conversations. We had such a good time talking to all of you. We wrote notes. We went through those notes. We looked at themes. We started to see sort of some diversity in the menu of badge systems that are out there. So we looked for things in the 7, I think it's going to be 6 or 7. We may have a surprise presentation from one group if we have time. We looked for things that had a lot of variety, so we didn't want everybody who was just after school. We didn't want everybody who had something in common. So it's really looking for things that are different in these systems that we ask to come forward and to present. So sparking the conversation, we asked them to answer at least one question, and hopefully they've been able to sort of dig deep into that question and then show you a little bit about their organization, their learning content, their badge system. I'm going to start off by introducing Lance Chrisman and Jeni Gotto. They're from the LevelUp project, which is a project mastery. So I'm going to hand it over to them, and they'll be doing their presentation for 10 minutes and then Q&A following that for 10 minutes. Is that correct? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Is it this one? This one, okay. We're just going to do a quick overview, and then we'll just dig in fast into the system that we're doing. But I was going to let Jeni start off, because really the badging system is an outgrowth of the change that has happened within the public school system, within the district, Adams 50. So that's a great grounding for you to understand a little bit about what's happening there.
All right, so a lot of the conversations in that last question and answer session really hit home for me, and the work that you're doing is the work for us to continue with really changing public education. We need your resources in our schools. So I am from Adams County School District 50. I'm Director of Assessment and Instructional Technology for the district. We are right outside of Denver, public school district with 19 schools, around 10,000 kids, 600 teachers. We are highly impacted, about 81% minority, 80% free and reduced lunch. We have a 42% mobility rate of kids in and out of our schools, sometimes right back in and out. Then we also have 45% English language learner population. But about 6 years ago, we got basically put in timeout by the state for low test scores. And we knew we needed to make a big change to our school to really support the education of our students. So we did a lot of research, a lot of talking with teachers, and made sure we had full support. So we weren't moving forward with a change in our district unless we had 85% support from our teaching staff. And we got that, and we decided to replace the traditional education system with that truly competency-based, personalized learning system where kids don't move based on social promotion. They move based on demonstrating mastery, so that we guarantee proficiency and readiness for the next level, whether it be college, straight into the workforce, whatever the student decides. So we don't have, on the front end of our system, K-12 grades, because we are still held to this grade assessment system from the No Child Left Behind. In the background, we do still have to put kids in seats based on their age during our state testing windows, but the rest of the time, kids are in different levels for every content area. So I may be a high performer in level 12, in math, and maybe I'm struggling with reading and I'm down in level 5, something different for science, something different for social studies, so it's based on their knowledge in each one of those content areas. We also moved away from the traditional grading system of A, B, C, D and 100-point scales, and we're on a 4-point scale, which we based around Marzano's taxonomy, which is a big issue when kids leave our system. So getting other people to understand this model and to buy into it is definitely a struggle from colleges to other high schools as kids transfer in and out of the system. So our learning is very individualized, and when you start asking teachers to do something like that, in the past, you teach your lesson, you assess your students, some get it, some don't, and traditionally we move on to the next lesson because we have to get through that textbook in a year. And we are halting that and saying we're going to work with kids until they demonstrate proficiency and move them, even if it's October 1st, to the next level when they're ready. But to do that, a lot of our teachers have one thing in their toolkit. If I'm teaching how to write a paragraph, I teach it. If kids don't get it, the next day I might teach it the exact same way. And we need more resources for our teachers to be able to pull into the classroom to support that work. And that's where Lance's team stepped into our district about 1.5 years ago and really helped support bring some of those answers to us.
So I'm Executive Director of Effective SC, which is a nonprofit, really focused on trying to enable social change, social change through technology. I won't go really in depth. We can talk about it later of how we came to be with them. LevelUp is an open source project that we're building. It's an open source learning platform to be able to capture learning wherever it occurs and be able to deposit that into the schools, into an organization, into job force, whoever wants to understand the competencies. But there was a lot of discussion earlier, just to kind of jump into it a little bit about, I'm going to fly through this, we've got probably about 6 minutes now. There were a lot of discussions earlier about competencies, competency-based systems, standards, and what I'm going to just quickly show you is an overview of how we align those with badges. How badges and competencies tie together in a way that actually works within the school, where kids get credit, and not only that within the school, it could be in other locations. But to quickly define a competency, this is an example of a competency that is in Adams County. So everything is all competency-based. Every single level, every single grade, or every single portion of learning boils down to a competency. A competency can be, it will have proficiency attached to each competency. So there's a 4-point scale by Marzano. It's modified from Benjamin Bloom's scale of mastery, just to be able to identify where are you in your progress of understanding and grasping and mastering that competency. Now, it was interesting talking about evidence and assessment earlier, because so many times assessment boils down to one single number in one location at one time that tries to define your learning, your competency, and your understanding. What happens at Adams County and what happens in LevelUp is that you actually have an evidence queue, an evidence history of knowledge around any single given competency. What I learned in French, I was here in French in high school, and I guarantee you I'm back here. This is a history. It changes, it ebbs and flows with time. But one other thing to point out on that previous slide is that the history comes from all kinds of sources. It's not just the teacher. Up until now, the teacher is the governor of your final score, or a state assessment is. But it comes from peer input, it comes from mentor input, it comes from all the types of learning activities that are happening here right now. You put all those competencies together and you have a canvas that you can work off of. And what we really, fundamentally in the entire system, technology, is that competencies overlap with each other. One thing that applies for Geometry 101 is also the same thing that applies as a computer programmer, which also, something in high school that you're learning overlaps with the knowledge and learning that you have in Girl Scouts. So we see all of this overlap and all of these progressions and proficiency pathways that will lead to mastery in one area applies to the mastery in the other area. You put that all together and we just call that a competency map. So if you look at that canvas with all the competencies and all the learning that happens, you get a really good picture. And this is a picture that changes in time. I'll give you a specific example. This is Mayhala. And May ends up at this point in her high school career where she wants to really grow and learn this one area. It applies to her math class that she's in, but as we saw earlier, it could apply to other things in the future. Where it really connects with right now is that everybody in this room has learning activities that you're creating, content, some kind of learning experience that is occurring. That we have badges. Everybody is creating badges out of these learning activities. And what we're doing is providing a system that allows you to identify competencies, whether they're common course competencies, whether they're your own competencies, whether they are another type of standard out there. It's just taking advantage of OBI and the evidence structure in the system to be able to flag things and tag things with competencies. So that as she progresses, her competency map changes. By the way, this competency map in Adams 50, every student has a competency map right now. And there's a massive amount of data that is really difficult for students to be able to get through, and teachers to be able to get through, which is why technology really applies. We're trying to get a lot of content to be able to have badges, and we're open to everybody's badges. We are not creating the standard. We're looking at scraping the backpack, and also, or if somebody wants to have more unique tie-ins, to be able to do that. From any type of content, school, from teacher input, organizational input, working with the Girl Scouts actually, to be able to do that, and also jobs. Just a few examples of some of the interfaces, flying by this quickly, both from a learner perspective as well as a teacher management perspective. The final piece of content here that is very specific to this thing is Space Wolf, which is a set of games that have badges that are coming in, and I'll let Jeni kind of quickly talk about that.
So the work that we've done on the Space Wolf game is through the funding of the Gates Foundation. And we wanted to specifically work with developing content that kids could work with outside of the school day and figure out how that data can flow into the system. Because that is, I think as we've been to these different Gates convenings and the DML is talking to other people to see, it's great if you create your teacher portals outside and teachers can go there and see what things kids have learned. But if that data doesn't come into our systems for teachers, your best teachers, maybe your top 10% are gonna go dig through that data and bring it over and give their kids credit within our system. But if it is that much extra work and a teacher's looking at 15 different outside systems and has to dig through that and bring that data over to theirs, that's where things fall apart and kids aren't getting the credit from outside. So this game we launched last week with our students. Some things that we saw at the Quest to Learn School as well. This is for some kids and it's not for others. The Girl Scout piece may be something that kids engage in more hands-on. We have, like I said, ELL students. We have one of the students in one of the classes is just brand new to the country. Very little English at this point, and he was playing one of the games and just seeing the excitement for him when he made that level movement in a math game. And literally, 16-year-old boy squealed in the middle of class and threw up his hands with so much excitement that he earned a badge that was going to support his learning in the classroom and he would get credit instead of doing the traditional paper pencil work. So a big need for us is how do we get this data into our system?
And that's it. So
the rainbow wheel of death has appeared.
Yes. So we have some time for questions and answers. This was just a brief. There's a lot more complexity.
Yeah. Again, this is supposed to be sparking, not answering every single question. So we're going to take a few questions and then go forward.
You mentioned possibly scraping the backpack. I'm curious if I understood you correctly. What would be the requirement to cause you to scrape it rather than use it like a displayer?
Not scrape the backpack.
Yeah, that's probably a poor choice of words.
You're going to be a displayer.
It would be an opt-in. The student would expose that, and we're still well away from actually going through that process. But it would be something that that student with their backpack would, if there is some additional tagging around some competencies. Right now we're supporting Common Core competencies, but other competencies as well in some of the evidence areas. And again, this is all up to us to try and figure out how that actually occurs over the course of this year. But that way, you don't have to tap into our API that we have for something like Space Wolf. Instead, the student can supply their badge to us, and we can at least record that as evidence.
There's here and then there.
Loved the competency map, but it looked like the matrix. And so I'm wondering, is it from a data visualization perspective, which I'm very interested in, and how we visualize teachers and kids interpret that visualization, is it easy to use? Is it easy to access and understand what it is?
Yeah, that visualization is purely for presentation only.
Okay.
This presentation only. There's actually a variety of visualizations because the data behind that is very rich. So there are a lot of different reports based off of the needs at any given time. There's the in-classroom need to understand where your student is right now.
Right.
And then there's also the whole progression of, are they on track to be able to pass all the gateways that they need to by a certain age or a certain time? Almost like a burn down chart for all Agile developers. But there's other types of visualizations that can occur.
Yeah, we worked with our teachers for the past year and a half with Lance's team. We have a system that we use now, which is, as far as I know, the only system out there that traditional education systems archive all data at the end of the year, and as teacher or student, you never get to see that again. And so we need a system where the data will live on forever, so that those competencies they got last year are still building, and all teachers and all students have access to that information. So we've worked with teachers to really learn in a proficiency pathway system, how do teachers manage that massive amount of data, because it is huge, and that's one of our biggest issues in trying to really live this new model.
There's another question.
Well, first of all, congratulations, great to see. My question is, how are you leveling competencies outside of the Common Core?
We have created rubrics, so scoring guides based on that Marzano scale to say, here's what it means to be a 4, and that's a big problem is people say, well, how do you define a 4? Define an A. There was never a definition for an A. But that is, we have for all 10, we have 10 different content areas in our system, and each one of them we've defined what it means to be a 4, 3, 2, 1, both for teachers and for students.
So they actually have a tremendous amount of standards above and beyond Common Core. There's ethics standards, there are a variety of others. So Common Core is only dealing with 2 of those content areas, but all the rest have been developed through multiple locations.
One big issue back on that last slide is that we need help with is when we've picked, when a student hits this level for exponents within one of the games, is that the right trigger point to release the badge? And over the next 3 months, we're piloting the game to figure out, based on what kids are doing in the classroom, does that match their proficiency level of what's being pushed out of the game? To make sure we've hit that trigger at the right point, to make sure it really is demonstrating proficiency. So that's a lot of work, and we're just doing one, in people's traditional sense, one grade level through this work to see how to make that work out.
There's another question.
So, hey, you guys are, I'm over here. I'm everywhere. So you're kind of asking the question, or maybe you're kind of talking all around it. Essentially, you're creating or you're tracking the pathways. Let's say for Khan Academy badges, you're ensuring that those are actually competencies that are equivalents to other things. So that's the question. And I feel like we're kind of talking a little bit around it, or and because I think that actually applies to a lot of the work that people are doing here. So can we ensure that there's, and again, I think this is one of those conversations we can have in a later breakout session, but I think there's a lot of interest in pathways and ensuring that everybody can actually use the same kind of pathways.
Yeah, that's a great point. That one of the major questions for this presentation really had to do with systems that we're trying to answer is how all these systems work together and connect together. Khan Academy has created an API that aligned to Common Core standards. Common Core is right now the top of mind way of interconnecting these things. The LRMI, for example, and the SLC and a variety of other systems are really using that as a basis. So it's a great way of, if you can do that, you tap into the greater system immediately, that there's more transportability for the badges and the work that's going on. But there needs to be more than that. Common Core is so narrow and so small. In fact, competencies are pretty infinite when it comes down to it. So there's ultimately something else that would occur. There's going to definitely be an informal approach toward that. There's the Achievement Standards Network that is doing it informally as well. But I think that every system has defined their own competencies. They can either piggyback on somebody else's standards that have been created or develop their own. But but we do believe that if you can define them as a competency that hopefully shares with somebody else, then and you can tag that in here, then anybody who recognizes that competency can ingest that information into the system. And we're trying to help build some standards on that.
One more quick question, and then we're going to have to move on. The good news is they're going to be here for 2 days, so this is just your first. We've got them trapped, so go ahead. One more question.
I was just wondering, did you have any obstacles getting teacher buy-in?
To the proficiency pathways? We actually, in the district, we spent 2 years just researching the model before we did any implementation. So we're starting our 4th year of true implementation. We started K-8. And the district did tons and tons of night meetings with parents, with teachers, to make sure they understood the system, and we did a vote, and the decision was, if not 85%, we weren't moving forward. And the first vote, we didn't have it. But teachers kept advocating for it and said, people just don't have enough information yet. So they went back and shared more information, and then it did come to the 85% vote of teachers saying, this is the right change for our kids. So it's, and there are absolutely obstacles. The resource piece is huge. When you are individualizing instruction every single day, and today these 5 kids need one thing, those 3 kids need another, these 3 kids need something different, and you're trying to plan for that, it is tremendous to try and pull those resources together to make sure that all kids are moving at their potential rate. So that is a big issue, and then the data management is phenomenal for teachers, and that's, you'll hear, if you talk to our teachers, they'll say, I feel like that's all I do is manage data. But, and in the first year, you could have asked any teacher, any principal in our system, and they all said, I feel like a first year teacher. So it was very, very different, because it's not what we experienced growing up as kids at the school that we went through. And so it was a complete mind shift for parents, for students, and for teachers. And our elementaries are making the shift much faster, so we were put in timeout. This year, as an entire district in every school, we're out of turnaround status. So we're seeing the shift now at the elementary level for sure, but at the secondary level, those kids were very entrenched in the traditional model, and they knew I could skip by with a D and graduate from high school. And now when you hold them to mastery of every skill, it's a very different picture.
Thank you, and these are great insights, so let's thank LevelUp for coming on up and
So our next presenters are Who Built America. They're a Teacher Mastery Award, Helen Noonan and David Langendoen. Am I saying that correctly? Langendoen. Okay, I'll give you this.
Okay, all right, thank you. My name's Ellen Noonan, and I'm from the American Social History Project. We were founded in 1981 at the City University of New York, which is New York City's public higher education system. And we were founded by a couple of labor historians, one of which you may have heard of, Herbert Gutman and Steve Breyer. And their goal was to take the scholarship on labor history and social history and history of working people and get it out beyond the university, into K-12 classrooms, into union education programs. And we've been doing that ever since through a variety of media projects and teacher professional development. So that was the context for applying to the DML competition. We were very interested in taking the face-to-face teacher professional development we've been doing in New York City since the late 80s and figuring out a way to do it online, and particularly, it converged with the emergence and adoption of the Common Core standards. That for the first time, instead of, and this is true, I think the Common Core standards are existing in parallel with the kind of state-by-state, sometimes they're called scope and sequence, or different social studies standards, you're supposed to teach this, and this in history. Suddenly, history and social studies teachers around the country are all going to be required to teach to the Common Core. They all need help learning how to integrate those kinds of literacy skills in the way the Common Core is looking for those and articulating those particular competencies into their history instruction. And so that's what this system is designed to do, aimed specifically at teachers. I'm feeling a little bit like we're one of the only groups in here that's not working with kids directly. We are working with their teachers. So I'm going to hand it over to David to explain.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
All right. Yeah, so our system's a little bit different than a lot of others for a couple reasons. One, this is really our badge. This is our big credential. This is what teachers are going to be working for probably over an entire semester. And I think this is the one that's going to be most meaningful from a professional point of view. But, you know, a badge system can't be one badge. So we went ahead and we thought about all the steps that had to go to be a master history teacher. And, sorry. So we thought about the rest of the badges as a series of steps. There are a series of milestones along the path. These are more important within our system. Sorry. Excuse me. Water. Yeah,
Water.
I wouldn't want
Water.
this got a little. I'll try to keep going.
2 minutes.
So we created a series of steps along the path.
2 minutes.
Starting again here. We created a system of steps towards a master history teacher. And so the most important focus is what we call the builder track. And this is representing just under the feeling of a white head standing up. I broke my foot a couple weeks ago, and so standing makes all the blood feel funny.
Why don't you sit down? We can unsnap them. There we go. Here, have a seat.
Thank you.
Here. Yep.
All right.
There.
Yeah, that's a lot better. No, like all the blood rushes to my foot and those weird things. So we have this apprentice system where a teacher is going in to initially, boy, so much to back up. So teachers go through a specific content area. So they might do a unit here. We might say, who freed the slaves? It's an area that you're studying in history. And you want to teach a lesson on that. So the teacher is going to download materials from our site and do a series of steps that include showing mastery or understanding of the content that they need to teach. That would earn you that initial apprentice builder badge. And that's an automated process where you take a little quiz and you go through it, some common course, some content area. Then second, you have to submit a lesson plan to us. And here's something that's a little, I think, different from our project is there's a lot of human eyes on this. There's sort of when you're doing this certification, this authentication of did someone earn a badge, obviously it's much simpler if it could be an automated process. So for example, that first badge, apprentice builder with no stars, you know, we can automate that. You take a 12 question quiz, multiple choice question. If you get 8 or 9 or whatever it is correct, you can get the badge and we do that automatically. But when you submit a lesson plan, we give you a template, but we really feel we need human eyes to be looking at that. So part of our learning path here is how much work is this going to take for every teacher? You know, what are the kind of resources we're going to need to sort of expand and build upon this? So then you submit your lesson plan. The second step there, that gets you the 1-star badge. The 2-star apprentice badge is when you've actually taught the lesson. Now here, it's another automated process. You just confirm that in fact you got in front of your kids, you taught your lesson, you got it done. How was that experience? We can do that automatically for the most part. And then for the final step in that sequence, you have to reflect upon it and submit student work to show that the lesson you taught made some kind of difference or impact. So that's a really important, probably the most important part of the step, obviously. And again, human, you know, people, Ellen has to look at that other master history teachers or people who are credentialed. One of our goals here is hopefully as people go through the program, earn that master history teacher might be able to come back and serve as folks who can moderate the community and be part of that and help authenticate other learners. So you did that once, great. So now, since we're a history program, we can use 18th century language. You went from apprentice to a journeyman. And now basically it's repeating the same path, though, just a different aspect of history that you want to teach. So maybe it's something about the Civil War, maybe it's something about the American Revolution. whatever the content area is. It's a new set of content to absorb. Hopefully, maybe you'll be a little more creative in modifying the lesson plan. You're a little more comfortable there. But fundamentally, you're going through just the same process again. And then finally, as if all that isn't enough, you reach the master track. And here, this won't come as much of a surprise, we're asking you to create a new lesson, a new whole case study, pull together the resources you think are valuable, go through that process, submit that for approval, and then you can go through that process of teaching it yourself, reflecting upon it, showing student work, and the results of a brand new piece of content. So you've gone through 2 of our units out of, I think we're going to want to have 10. And then ultimately, we're going to ask you to contribute to the community's content by creating your own lesson. If that's approved, other teachers could use and modify and change that. So that's the core track through it, but to be a master teacher of history or master teacher in general, we feel that there are other aspects that you need to participate in. One, critically, is community. You don't do this in isolation, so we actually want to credential folks who are on our forums and message boards answering questions, giving constructive critiques and feedback, and even proposing joint projects together. So me and Ellen, or me and you guys, or someone out there are forming up as a team and submitting a new resource for the community, and all of that can be credentialed. You don't need to get all the community badges to move ahead, but we're going to require 2 or 3 of them as part of the overall credential. And same thing also with, we've got the final track, almost done, the specialist track. We want you to show some other, Common Core is obviously a big thing, so we've got both reading and writing specialist ones there. This is a history program, so if you decide to go through all the units and take all the quizzes and do really well on all of them, you get the History Geek badge. Tech Guru is about using different technologies in your presentation style and manner. These are all just supplemental things that all eventually feed into, finally, the authentication of the Master History Teacher, which is really the ultimate certification. Again, as I said, we wanted to get it. Anyway, thank you for bearing with my foot here.
I just wanted to speak briefly about, the question we were asked to address was how are we sort of solving a problem in our system? And so we see our system as professional development for teachers, in our case particularly social studies teachers. One big problem is the gap between what happens in professional learning settings for teachers and what actually makes it into classroom change and them doing something different in their classroom. We're trying to address that in the badge system by what we reward. A lot of professional development for history teachers teaches them new content. They listen to scholars, give a talk, and they read things, and they get new materials, and that's great. And we have some ways of rewarding that with History Geek and with sort of the first stage of the builder track. And what we're really rewarding is trying things out in your classroom, submitting, student work, reflecting on it in the community and with us, with the Master Teachers ASHP, and we're making you do it more than once, right? So it's iteration, and it's reflection, and it's really doing it in your classroom is the heart of this. The other gap we're trying to address is the gap between what teachers are trying to do when they design and teach a lesson and what students actually learn. So that's where the emphasis on student work comes in. So teachers always have a general sense of what works and what doesn't, but when you take a few pieces of student work and you really drill down and you look at them, in particular, if you're saying, well, I think we're going to look at this piece of student work and see if the students really got this particular Common Core skill or this particular historical thinking skill, it's eye-opening. And it's a kind of habit of practice that we want to encourage in teachers. And it's time-consuming. And so we need to reward that kind of practice with teachers. My last thought, I just want to kind of bring it back to something that came up quite a bit this morning, the idea of who are the arbiters of credit. We think that is both the opportunity and the challenge of our system. It's an opportunity because we're not your principal. We have nothing to do with your tenure and your evaluation and your promotion, or whether you're going to get laid off. None of that. We're not part of that. And I think that's an opportunity for teachers to have a kind of more safe place in which to try things out, to maybe show the student work that the kid wasn't doing so well, and figure out how to make it better. But it's a challenge because this is time consuming, and for teachers who are already working incredibly hard doing what they're doing, how do we motivate and kind of, make this worth their time? So.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Who built a mirror? So we have a few minutes to look, and people are, now they got it, man. They're like shooting their hands up in the air. They're like, I can get in a queue. We've one in the back and then one in the front. Real quickly.
Hey, awesome. I'm Vanessa, I'm with Peer to Peer University. You have several different kinds of badges in addition to the tracks, so 4 different kinds of badges and 3 tracks. How do you stem confusion with the community amongst the different kinds? And how do you address sustainability of posting on so many different kinds of badges? And then third question, like, how do you see them moving forward? Like, will they change? Will you retire them? Will you tweak them? That's a lot.
Well, we probably should have prefaced the entire thing by saying we haven't started yet.
Okay.
We're launching in January. We're launching in January, so this is still in the the nice phase. We're sure everything's going to work just the way we planned it. We realize this is a very complex system, and all along we've sort of struggled with how do you balance giving teachers an experience that's sufficiently rigorous to mean something and to actually change what they're doing in the classroom versus something that is doable and sustainable.
I'll try to stand here for a second. Yeah, a couple of notes in this. One, especially in the builder track, we haven't decided technically how we're going to do things, but the last badge forward is the one that matters. So we're almost possibly going to look to sort of, if you get the 2-star one and then get the 3-star badge, you don't want to have the 2-star one. The 3-star one represents everything, and when you move to the next one, so instead of having all 12 of these, you'd end up with just one at a time, sort of progression. Second thing we're doing also for teachers is we're being very clear now in our design for the site, where you are, what do I have to do next? There's always an easy button to press of like, how do I do the next things I need to do to earn the badges to move forward? So it's not you're swimming in this sea. There's always a clear, what's next for me in this moment.
My name is Sarah Hinchy, and I'm here with Barnett Berry in the Center for Teaching Quality. I also happen to be a middle school teacher just down the road in Orange County. So first of all, I wanted to thank you for letting me kind of crash your party here, because it's really exciting to hear everything that everyone's discussing. And as a teacher, I'm sitting here going, and I think that so many of my colleagues would feel the same. In thinking about this more specifically, I am National Board Certified. And if you're familiar with that process, it's a way that our teachers can show their achievement in various levels of both their content and their understanding of development of children as well as leadership. And this process mimics some of that to an extent of how we're progressing in our learning and reflecting upon that, which is beautiful to see because many of National Board teachers will cite that as being one of the most meaningful and powerful professional development experiences they've ever had. One of the questions I had was, in thinking about the 2 latter stages, it sounds like maybe a moderation of that community might be helpful, having experts in there to do that, and I was wondering what kinds of thoughts you had about who may serve those roles.
Yeah, at the beginning, that's going to be folks at the American Social History Project. So myself and other sort of colleague, Leah Potter, who some of you might have met, she was in San Francisco. And so that's a real question too about the sustainability of this kind of system, is it takes real live people spending real time, giving teachers feedback, giving them, constructively engaging with them. We hope eventually a lot of that will start to happen in the community space. That feels like a very big sort of challenge of this, is we're not just building a badge system, we're trying to build an effective teacher professional community, and that's in itself a whole kind of endeavor. Eventually, if this does get some traction, we do hope that once someone's earned the Master History Teacher designation, that gives them the status to do some of that moderation and feedback.
Great. There's another question.
Hey, hi, my name is Jeni. I'm from BuzzMath. I'm also a former math teacher. So as we're developing our system for students, which most of us are, where the badges are allowing them for specific opportunities like higher ed, different scholarship opportunities and stuff like that. So as a teacher, what kind of opportunities would the badge lead them to?
You mean within the system or
no,
in
outside
their
of the
world?
system, right?
That's, as I said, that sort of arbiter of credit, like what kind of weight and credit will these badges have in the professional worlds that teachers operate in is a very big one. And in fact, I will thank the Gates Foundation that they are funding a similar project that we're involved in with a group called the Education Development Center called Zoom In, which is to develop a whole suite of tools for social studies teachers and students to help them, learn and get competent in the Common Core competencies. And as part of that project, they are going to help us spend more time with the badge system, perhaps integrating the badge system into that other project a little bit, and going out and doing some piloting with at the state, with a couple of states level education officials to see if we can get some buy-in for these badges as a sort of recognized form of professional development. Because as you know, the sort of landscape of teacher professional development and continuing education requirements is a total patchwork. Every state has its own requirements for what teachers are supposed to do to maintain certification, or they're supposed to do a certain number of what are called CEUs, continuing education units, and it's totally different from state to state. So we see one of our big challenges for this to indeed to catch on is to figure out how to hook it into those systems.
Great. We're going to have one more question, and then we're going to move.
It's a great program. I'm really excited about it. It's not a question though. It's an opportunity. I just had to do this poll because you mentioned that you think that you have this human element of evaluation and that kind of sets you aside, but I'm really curious to know how many people here have completely automated systems of granting or plan completely automated systems of granting badges?
Completely?
Yeah, completely. How many people have human element involved in developing? Yeah. Well, you could. It could just be quizzes, and I was just curious. That's yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question because ours is heavily human, and ours is heavily human, and we're just desperately trying to find more ways to make it more automated because it's especially some of the community stuff, the business logic around the programming gets really intense to say, is this person really contributing in a meaningful way? What can we possibly?
Even with a small amount of human intervention, if
Yeah.
if you're scaling to millions of people, it's even a little bit is going to be a problem.
Right.
And
We're well aware of that.
Yeah, and I think these are great questions to go in depth because I do think this is sort of I think your question actually is an overarching question for many of the badge systems that people are developing is sort of what are the costs, to having that human interaction, and or if we're thinking about sustaining badges over the long haul, what does that mean for us as system builders? And so I think that's great. So thank you, Who Build America. You see them, you know who they are.
So they just sparked exactly the conversation that we hoped that they did about community. They've got a really interesting aspect. So we're going off script with our next presentation. David Wiley and J.C. Wilkins with the National Manufacturing Badge System. We had a conversation where I must have tripped the overachievement trigger with them, and they have a full demo. So we're going to squeeze them into the program because it's really worth it. Considering that the grants have really, you won these awards 6 months ago, to have a demo at this point is pretty breathtaking. So I'm going to introduce J.C. Wilkins and David Wiley and their badge system.
Great, thank you, Sheryl. I'm J.C. Wilkins, and joined by my partner in crime here, David Wiley. I'm from the Manufacturing Institute at the National Association of Manufacturers, and I think we sort of represent a different group here, which is the employer side of the equation. And what we focus on every day is not only how we're attracting talent, but how we're qualifying that talent, and then how we're developing that talent. And many of you might not know, but there are 600,000 jobs open in manufacturing today. We face a major skills gap crisis. And what we do know about manufacturers is they have new aspirations for how they're attracting and developing talent, but they have very old tactics for doing so. Literally, I talked to a manufacturer last week who has some guy stand out on the side of the highway with a sandwich board saying, we're hiring certified welders. And we also know that there are a number of great youth development organizations, two of which we have partnered with, Skills USA and Project Lead the Way, on this project. And they are really giving kids, through project-based and experience-based experiences or experience-based learning, the kinds of leadership skills, the kind of technical skills, and the sort of real world skills that manufacturers need today. And they reach about 700,000 kids, kind of retroactively through alumni organizations, and then each year. And so through our National Manufacturing Badge System, we are badging the talent of those organizations and connecting them to employers, essentially saying to employers, you should really take a second look at these kids, sort of branding that talent. So, David?
Thanks, yeah, so when we got an email that said demo, we went, and we built a demo. It's kind of easy that we have a bit of a head start because the technical partner on our grant is a startup called Degree that had already been working on their platform that has a mission very similar to what we're trying to do, and I'm going to show that here in just a second. But this is my fake email. It says, David Wiley, congratulations on winning the Skills USA Engineering Materials Competition. I guess if I did this, you could see it. Can I do that? No. Anyway, to claim your badge, click here and add this URL in because we don't have the API stood up yet. But what you'll see is that Degreed, on top of their platform, is actually implementing a backpack as well. So this is the platform. If I sign in with Facebook here, what it's done is it's gone out to Facebook and pulled the information about which universities I attended. So I'm going to tell it real quickly here that I have an undergraduate degree in music. And I don't remember what that was. We'll say I had a 3.2 GPA. And I did better in my doctoral degree. That was more like 3.9. So I've logged into the system now. And you'll see basically what it's going to do is it's going to pre-populate a profile for me, guessing based on my music degree and guessing based on my education degree what kinds of classes I will have taken and how much progress I've made toward kind of an associate's equivalents or bachelor's equivalent or master's or PhD equivalent. And over here on the transcript page, I can see it's actually made a bunch of guesses about the specific courses that I took. And in a future version, there will be a button that says specify here, and I'll be able to hop in and say, yes, I did actually took a semester of English dictation as a voice major because I'm from West Virginia, and when I'm not thinking about it, I talk like this. And you can't sing Bach like that and get a good grade. So, lots of English dictation in my background. But anyway, so here's courses, but you'll see this badge button here, so I can add a badge. And do I copy that? Let's see. Maybe not. So it's gone out and grabbed the badge, which is the Skills USA Champions badge, and there's the provider. And then it's going to give me an opportunity to categorize the badge as I bring it into the system. And so there's a big list of categories and disciplines and subdisciplines built out off of a federal list of the types of things that people major in. So here's mechanical engineering, and here this was a materials badge. It took me so many hours to complete it. And when I accept that, then you'll see in addition to the 2 university providers I have, I've got a badge provider now, which is Skills USA. And here's that badge rendering right in the transcript. And if we come back to look at the equivalency on the degree side here, you'll see that now, in addition to the things that guessed about me previously before, there's a new bucket for engineering materials. And so the goal with this kind of profile is to interleave formal courses, informal badges all together in a way that just push your progress bar across to show I know this much about this topic, this much about the other, and completely destroy the separation between a transcript with formal courses and one with badges or certificates or whatever else it might be. Jailbreaking the degree is the phrase. I like it. That's the demo.
So because they were so quick, we're going to take one question and then we're going to move on. I'm sorry, they're going to be here. I swear, no one's leaving. No one's leaving. We're going to take one question and then we're going to move on to the small group.
Awesome. I'm so psyched to see this launch. I've been following its development for a while. It looks great. Couple questions. How do you relate stand up, okay. How do you relate the sort of macro level accreditation and recognition with the projects that people are doing? And if it's not a project, how do you connect it to the evidence? Because there's so many different kinds of ways that evidence is shown. So.
For her or for?
For degree, I guess.
Oh. Let me offline that with you because it's not really a badge-specific question, right?
Right.
And I'm sensitive that we got wedged into the program already.
Okay.
Okay, but that's a good point. Why don't you pass it to your colleague forward? There's a gentleman, one more right there. He had a quick question. Right there.
Yeah, it's a really quick question. I just wanted to know, does this, in the OBI big picture, does this mean that you're a displayer, a backpack, or both?
Currently trying to be a backpack, although there's not a lot of great documentation about how to be your own backpack. So we read badges in and out according to the standard. It's not a displayer yet, but it will be a displayer eventually. Yeah. There's only so much code you can write to run a demo at a meeting like this, you know. But it will definitely be a displayer as well, and that relates to.
There's also currently being developed a platform specifically for manufacturers to connect with potential talent called U.S. Manufacturing Pipeline that's being piloted actually in the military for returning veterans. And so the idea is that we could then take these badges and automatically transfer them over into another platform so students could potentially have the choice.
So they could talk to our displayer API, pull it out, render it in their profile on a job site, and then people could search. Employers could search the job site to see for people who have certain badges.
So thank you for doing a very quick and on-time demo. Excellent job. And thank you guys. We're hearing a lot of information at many different levels. So you guys have we've been pushing you sort of up here, thinking big systems, big change, and then we sort of pushed you in the Spark conversations, very deep, very specific, and we're making you sort of jump to both levels all the time, like, well, how does this really work on the ground? But what does that mean for the big picture, going back and forth? And that's exactly the type of thinking you need to do as you're building an ecosystem, right? So we're gonna move us now into sort of letting you dig into some small working groups. Each of you have been assigned a working group based on some synergies of your badges, and so in your documents that you have, there is a paper that says working group sessions, and it lists your name and which working group and the room number that you're going to be in. And if you have any questions, the HASTAC staff in terms of where these rooms are located can direct you. We'll be having little van of lights all over, sort of guiding you all over into the right places. But what we want you to do in those working groups is a couple different things. You guys have been using the wiki to populate sort of lessons learned that you're sort of doing from your badge work, and also challenges. And so the idea is in these small groups that you're going to be digging in with the partners in your small group discussions to sort of talk about what you've learned and where your challenges are, and hopefully taking some of these conversations and igniting solutions, strategies, some brainstorming around moving your badge system to the next level, sort of overcoming or moving through some of those challenges that you may be experiencing, or coming up with bigger questions that we want to bring back to the group. So we're going to ask each group to designate a reporter, right, to take the last 10 minutes of the group, and we'll give you a warning, to sort of report back on the wiki, sort of what are the takeaways from our conversation. And it could be questions, it could be strategies, it could be possible solutions if we're able to overcome some of those challenges within that time frame. The other piece that I want to point out that we're going to be asking you to do is to not only be doing this work sort of for the wiki, for the full group, sort of the full badge ecosystem to be considering, but also to be thinking about sort of your specific teams, right? So as you're going through this set of workshops today, we put together sort of a team action planning document. Some folks, this is really helpful to folks. It has a number of questions that we asked the presenters. You heard some of the folks say, we were asked to talk on this question and sort of this challenge. So we put sort of a series of questions that have been put forth to sort of push your thinking around your badge development and launch. And so as you're moving through these workshops and these sessions, think about sort of what are the next action steps, because you're representing teams right back at home. So what are the action steps that you need to be doing sort of come Monday to be putting into place. And some people like to use paper documents, some people are going to be on Evernote and already documenting and setting themselves task lists already and electronically, and that's great. But we're just trying to provide a frame for you to say coming out of these discussions should be action, right? Everybody get that? So we're going to ask you to document in 2 ways. So when we are finished with the small group discussions, we're going to go right into lunch to allow you time to sort of network. In that time when I was pushing everybody back into the room, we're going to allow you to have some nice time to do that. And we got back on track with our time this afternoon. So any questions from the group about where you're going, where you're heading? All right, hearing none, go for it and problem solve and discuss.